Should we be intervening in Libya? Let me give you the both sides of the story, and then you and I can have a discussion about it. So one side of the story, let's call it the Hillary Clinton side of the story, or the international diplomacy side of the story, says that there are civilians that are being bombed by a dictator, and therefore, in order to stop the bloodshed, period, end, with the goal in mind of stopping the bloodshed, it is a humanitarian imperative of the United Nations, that's why they exist, to go in and stop the bloodshed. Do whatever it takes. Almost whatever it takes. President Obama saying as recently as 2 o'clock this afternoon, he won't put ground troops in, but you know what? He's putting pilots at risk, and he's putting our naval forces at risk, and there's no reason to suppose that Gaddafi doesn't have expensive weapons that couldn't shoot down a plane or sink a ship once in a while. So we don't really know when we put people in harm's way. Just because they're not on the ground doesn't mean they're not going to be at risk of life and limb, right? It's obvious. Okay. Military is military. So I don't really understand his so-called artificial distinction between ground troops and not. Obviously, ground troops is dirtier, it's messier, but it doesn't mean the other is without risk to our military. But the side that is fighting to do this is trying to act on behalf of civilians. And when, in fact, the UN resolution was passed last night, the reports are that the happy Libyans fired weapons into the air to celebrate, exploding green and red fireworks. Also, that people that were supporters of the Arab League, which wanted this to happen, were very happy as well. I'm going to tell you the story within the story that I think is being underreported. Here's what I think is being underreported. And it's a little line in an otherwise very long story. And I'm going to read it to you. And here's what it says. It says this. It says that people are leaving Libya, and 300,000 already have left. So you want to know why France and England and the Arab League and the people that did sign on the Security Council, like Portugal and some other places, I'll tell you who they are. You want to know what they're really worried about? They're not worried about Gaddafi killing a few civilians. Give me a break. This is the big boys. This is the big world. They're worried about the hordes of refugees that are scrambling to get over the border into their countries. They already have enough trouble with the Arabs that are there. France has enough. Right? Italy has enough. Spain has enough. They don't want the ones that are there. And this is not news that I'm telling you. This is obvious news. We've been reporting it, and you can read it yourself. So the underreported story is that it's not about the rebels or saving some civilian lives. It's about stopping the dam. It's about stopping the overflow of refugees from these countries, of people that are clamoring to get into Western Europe. And I guess they feel that the only way they can do that is by bombing the crap out of Gaddafi and giving the rebels some kind of a sense, or the people some kind of a sense, that they don't need to run away. But you know what? The more prolonged this conflict is, the more people are going to run away anyway. So it's very difficult to stop a runaway refugee issue when there's instability and unrest and war. I'm going to tell you who voted for and who voted against, because this is important. And then we're going to talk about the United States, because as the United States is first after the Cold War, we became the single superpower. So all of a sudden we had very big shoulders. And the presidents of our country, and in our way, our own hubris, led us to believe that every single conflict in the world, we had to be involved. And we had to be the leader for every single humanitarian to be on the force of good and what is right and what is good. And it's wonderful to be idealistic, and it's wonderful to help when you can. We all do it in our personal lives. We want to do it in our national life. But you know what? We've extended ourselves in Iraq and Afghanistan to the tune of billions, if not trillions of dollars that we can't afford, with no hope of resolving the crises of democracy that plague those countries right now, the crises of political corruption, the crises of civil rights, and the crises of politics from within. We don't know that being in Afghanistan has stemmed the tide of terrorism in Pakistan. In fact, you could argue very strongly, I think, that our intervention in two Muslim countries has only gotten more Muslims against us since we went in there. That what was a fringe terrorist element of Al-Qaeda on 9/11 2001 became a larger movement because it played into their paranoia that America wanted to colonize Arab countries. So there you go. So I don't think it's really helped our cause if our cause was to diminish terrorism. And going into Libya, I got to ask you, is President Obama leading us down the right path? He hasn't held one debate in Congress. What he did instead was convene all the Senate. The senators were called, 100 of them. I don't know how many showed up. They were called to a late night meeting last night in Washington, D.C. I believe it was at the White House, but perhaps not, around 10 o'clock. And they were briefed by a range of military and U.S. security personnel on the fact that President Obama had decided to go ahead and vote yes with the UN Security Council, not only voting yes, by the way, but trying to persuade others to vote yes in order to establish a quote-unquote no-fly zone, which everybody who's in power seems to acknowledge is too little too late. So we're talking now about ships and planes, and we don't know what level of involvement. But the Senate was briefed. They were not consulted. And if you read your Constitution, wars and in general, the declaration of war has to be by both houses, and significant foreign affairs are always with the advice and consent of the Senate. There was no consent of the Senate here. There was a telling of the Senate. Big difference. So the president goes and unilaterally, which in foreign policy he has a very broad range of authority to do, everything, frankly, short of war. He has a huge range of constitutional authority when it comes to foreign affairs. He tells our Senate, this is what he's doing. He tells the people today, meaning us, this is what he's doing. And nobody's had a chance to really air it out. We've all been very distracted with what's going on in Japan, as has he, I'm sure. Very distracted with natural courses and events like earthquakes, and then the unnatural ones of radiation. Where's it coming? When's it coming? How much is it coming? And in the meantime, I want to tell you some other news that's going on today. I'm trying to help put together the pieces of a puzzle. If we go to Libya, what's the rationale in not going to Yemen? Do you know that today in Yemen, 47 protesters were shot by the pro-government forces, by the President Sana'a over there? Why shouldn't we go into Yemen? Maybe because Yemen doesn't have oil. Maybe it's about oil. Or maybe it's about the amount of refugees that are going into Western Europe. I say to you, when I look back from all of this, and they are pieces of a puzzle, and I'm trying to work it out, and believe me, I don't pretend to be anybody who knows a scintilla of what our president knows right now in terms of his briefings, because I am not naive, and I understand as a member of the public we're only told a little bit of what's on the surface. But maybe because of that, we have an ability to stand back and see the forest for the trees better than the people in Washington, D.C. Maybe it's because we don't know all the intricacies and details that we don't have to get lost in them. When you step back, the United States and much of the world is intervening in a civil conflict, in a conflict in which not one American life has been threatened. This is not a situation like it was when President Reagan was president, in which there was a retaliation for an unwanted, unprovoked effort, an unprovoked attack on our Marines, as you recall, attack on our military by Libya. That was unprovoked, and so we responded in kind. This is not the same thing. From 1861 to 1865, this country had a civil war. And it was the bloodiest conflict the United States has ever seen, or probably ever will see. It was bloodier even than World War II in terms of the amount of dead and wounded that we had in this country. And when you consider proportionally how fewer people we had then, you can imagine how horrific it was. And I was just thinking, I was in the hairdresser today, and I was thinking, well, what if a country had decided that it was their duty to fight on behalf of slavery? That they decided that the anti-slavery forces were wrong. And they had come in with bombs and with artillery and with cannons and with men, and they had descended upon Atlanta. And they had said, we want to join you, rebel stronghold. We take the rebel side. We think the North and the Union and the Yankees are damn wrong. We want to take your side. We believe in your cause. We believe in the Confederacy. How would we have felt as a country? Right or wrong, still our country. Stay out. I would imagine that there are a lot of people in Libya, as much as they hate Gaddafi, and they may, who say to themselves, you know what, we hate him, but he's ours. And I'm not sure that I want the rest of the world coming in. You know, in the first heady days of save us, it always looks good. And then in the second and third day, you know what they say? Get out. But we have a tendency to stay.